Today, we're going to dive into one of the most real and disturbing fears with 7 horror stories involving situations in which someone followed you home. Get ready to hear chilling accounts of stalking, surveillance, and that distressing feeling that you're not really alone, not even in your own home. We're going to explore stories based on real events, where danger lurks in the shadows of everyday life and fear knocks on the door when you least expect it. So, get comfortable, check that all the doors are locked, and let's start this chilling journey. Oh, and before someone strange shows up on your street, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and leave a like. This helps the channel a lot and ensures that you don't miss any scary content like this. Let's go. The stranger in the subway, Julia Weber, 29, worked as a graphic designer at an advertising agency in central Berlin. After a long day at work, she took the U8 subway around 10:30 p.m., as she did almost every day. Winter was beating down on the city and the platforms were almost empty. Julia sat near the door, distracted by her cell phone, when she noticed a man in a dark coat and a beanie watching her from the other side of the carriage. His gaze was fixed, intense, as if he were trying to memorize every detail of her face. When she changed trains at Alexanderplatz, Julia felt the weight of his gaze again. The man boarded the same carriage, now sitting closer to her. She pretended not to notice, but the tension grew with each station. When she finally reached her stop, Geisenbrunnen, the man got off right behind her. Julia quickened her pace, trying to keep her distance, but she could hear his footsteps echoing behind her. She glanced back quickly. He looked away, pretending to rummage through his pocket. The walk to her building was short, but that night it seemed endless. Julia changed sides and crossed the street, but the man kept his distance, always a few meters away. When she reached the gate, she pretended to look for her keys for longer than necessary, hoping he would walk right past. He stopped at the corner, pretending to look at his cell phone, but clearly watching her. Julia quickly went inside, locked the door, and ran up the stairs, her heart racing. That night she slept badly. She dreamed of footsteps in the hallway, shadows beneath the door. In the morning, when she left for work, she noticed fresh footprints in the snow beneath her window. Her fear turned to paranoia. She began looking over her shoulder, avoiding deserted streets, changing trains on the subway. In the following days, the man appeared again, at the supermarket, in the coffee line, across the street as she was leaving work. Julia tried to rationalize it. Berlin was a big city. Coincidences happened. But the frequency of their encounters was disturbing. One night, when she got home, she found an anonymous note in her mailbox. "You look tired. You should go to bed earlier." The note was unsigned, but the handwriting was precise, almost meticulous. Frightened, Julia installed a discreet camera in her bedroom window, pointing toward the street. On the first night, at 3:12 a.m., the camera captured the man standing across the street, staring at the building. He remained there for almost 20 minutes before disappearing into the darkness. Julia took the footage to the police, but there was no explicit threat or crime committed. She was simply told to stay alert. The tension grew when Julia found signs of a break-in on the kitchen window. Nothing had been stolen, but objects were out of place. A cup had been moved, a pillow had fallen over, a window was ajar that she swore she had closed. The fear became unbearable. Julia began sleeping with a kitchen knife next to her bed and avoided going out alone at night. Determined not to be a victim, she began researching similar stories on online forums. She discovered dozens of stalking cases in Berlin, many of them unsolved. In a support group, she met other women who reported feeling watched for weeks before realizing they were being followed. Some received notes, others found personal items displaced. All described the same pattern of surveillance and psychological manipulation. Julia decided to change her routine. She started going out at different times, asked the doorman to keep an eye out for any strange movements, and warned her close friends. One night, when she was returning from dinner, she noticed the man again on the corner. This time, she decided to confront him. She took out her cell phone, called the police loudly, and crossed the street toward him. The man hesitated, turned quickly, and disappeared between the buildings. Now that the police had more information, they stepped up surveillance in the area. During a night patrol, they caught the man hanging around Julia's building, carrying a backpack containing photos of her, notes on her schedule, and even a screwdriver. He was arrested and identified as Tomasz Nowak, 38, a Polish man with a history of harassment and threats in other European countries. In his apartment, the police found detailed files on Julia and other women, as well as records of their routes, schedules, and habits. The case gained repercussion in Berlin, leading to debates about urban security and protection for stalking victims. Julia moved to a new apartment, spent months in therapy, and became an activist for the rights of stalking victims. Her story was featured in news reports and lectures, warning of the real and growing danger of being followed and observed by urban predators. The case of the subway stranger has become a symbol of the everyday fear of being targeted, showing that terror can begin with a simple glance at an empty train car and turn into a nightmare of surveillance, manipulation, and constant threat. For those who live in big cities, the warning is: trust your instincts, seek help at the slightest sign of danger, and never underestimate the power of real fear, because often it is the only warning between routine and the abyss. The driver of the deserted street, Liam O'Sullivan, a 21-year-old engineering student, was walking home alone after a college party in central Dublin. It was just after 2 a.m., and the streets of the Drumcondra neighborhood were practically deserted in the light rain. Liam was walking quickly, listening to music on his headphones, when he noticed a black car parked on the corner, engine running, low beams discreetly illuminating the sidewalk. As he crossed the street, the car began to follow him slowly, keeping a constant distance. Liam glanced back, trying to hide his nervousness, but the vehicle accelerated smoothly whenever he increased his pace. He tried to change course, turning onto a side street, but the car turned right behind him. The sound of wet tires on asphalt echoed in the silent night. Liam felt panic rising. He thought about running, but he was afraid of drawing even more attention. He decided to cross a small park, believing the car wouldn't be able to follow him there. He ran across the soggy grass, slipping and looking back with every step. The car stopped beside the park, its headlights now off, but Liam was sure the driver was watching him from the shadows. When he finally reached his home street, the car reappeared, coming slowly around the opposite corner. Heart pounding, Liam ran to the gate, punched in the code with shaking hands, and entered the building, locking the door behind him. He stumbled up the stairs, entered the apartment, and only then realized that he was in a cold sweat, his chest tight with anxiety. Trying to calm himself, he dropped his phone on the table and walked over to the window. The black car was parked across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the city lights. Liam turned off the lights in his apartment and hid behind the curtain, watching. After a few minutes, the car slowly pulled away and disappeared around the corner. Relieved but still restless, Liam went to take a shower. When he came out, he found his cell phone vibrating with an anonymous message. "I like the red jacket. You run well, but you should look back more when you cut through the park. Good night, Liam." His blood ran cold. The message described exactly what clothes he was wearing, the route he took, and even every detail of the park. Over the next few days, Liam noticed small signs of surveillance. A letter with no return address with his name on it arrived in the mail. Inside, a photo taken from a distance, showing him entering his house on the night of the party. On campus, he saw the same black car parked across the street, engine running, as if waiting for him. He began to change routes, leaving at different times, but he always felt like he was being watched. Desperate, he went to the police, but with no explicit threats or evidence of a crime, he was only told to stay alert and avoid walking alone at night. Liam installed cameras at the entrance to his building and asked his roommates to be alert. One night, when he reviewed the footage, he saw the black car parked in front of the building for almost an hour, the driver never getting out of the vehicle. Fear turned into paranoia. Liam began to avoid going out alone, developed insomnia, and suffered from anxiety attacks. He sought support on online forums and discovered similar stories of stalking in Dublin, many of them unsolved. In a support group, he met other young people who reported being followed by unmarked cars, receiving threatening messages and anonymous photos. Determined not to be a victim, Liam began recording everything: times, license plates, photos of the car, messages received. He shared the information with the police and his roommates. One night, on his way back from the library, he encountered the black car again, but this time he wrote down the license plate and took photos of the driver. The next day, he took everything to the police station and insisted that they investigate. Police finally identified the vehicle as belonging to a man with a history of stalking and threats who had already been investigated in other stalking cases. The suspect was arrested, and during a search of his home, detailed records of routines, photos and notes about Liam and other young people in the area were found. The case gained repercussion in Dublin, leading universities and student associations to reinforce safety and community surveillance campaigns. Liam moved to another neighborhood, spent months in therapy, and became an activist for the protection of victims of stalking. His story was reported in newspapers and lectures, serving as a warning about the real danger of being followed and watched by urban predators. The case of the deserted street driver has become a symbol of the everyday fear of being targeted, showing that terror can begin with a silent car on an empty street and turn into a nightmare of surveillance, manipulation, and constant threat. For those who live in big cities, the warning is: never ignore the feeling of danger, seek help at the slightest sign of persecution, and trust your own instincts. Often, they are the only warning between routine and the abyss. The obsessive. Customer Emma Turner, 26, was a barista at a busy coffee shop in downtown Vancouver. The work was intense, but she enjoyed the routine and the regular customers. Among them was an ordinary-looking man, always in a blue shirt and thick glasses, who ordered the same coffee every morning. At first, Emma thought nothing of it. She greeted him politely, served his order, and went on with her day. But over time, she noticed that he was watching her more than usual, keeping his gaze fixed even after he had taken her order. Over the next few weeks, Emma began to notice unsettling coincidences. The client, whom she had mentally nicknamed Mr. Blue, began to appear in other places: at the local supermarket, at the gym where she worked out, even at the pharmacy where she bought medicine for her mother. Always distant, always watching. Emma tried to ignore him, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing day. Discomfort turned to fear when, upon arriving home one rainy night, she found an envelope with no return address in her mailbox. Inside was a handwritten letter. "You have a beautiful smile. I like to see you at the cafe, but I prefer to watch you when you're distracted." Enclosed was a photo taken from a distance, showing Emma closing the front door, clearly captured. Without her noticing, over the next few days, the letters multiplied. Some contained intimate details of her routine. "I saw you bought apples today. You prefer green ones, don't you?" Others were accompanied by more photos, always taken From a distance, at different times and places, at the bus stop, in the gym parking lot, from the apartment window. Emma began to feel panicked when leaving the house, looking over her shoulder, changing her route, avoiding predictable times. Emma confided the situation to a colleague at the cafe, who suggested contacting the police. The officer who attended to her was attentive, but explained that without explicit threats or aggression, there was little he could do other than file a report and recommend caution. Emma installed a camera on the apartment door and asked the building manager to increase security in the building. Mr. Blue's behavior became more invasive. He began to appear across the street when Emma left for work, to follow her discreetly, to the coffee shop, and to observe her during her workday, now in complete silence. One day, Emma found a bouquet of flowers on her doorstep without a card, but with a note: to brighten your cloudy days. Tensions reached a peak when Emma returned from the gym to find the apartment door ajar. Inside, nothing appeared to have been stolen, but one of the paintings in the living room was crooked, and a necklace she always left on the dresser was missing. The next morning, she received another letter. Your apartment is cozy. The necklace looks beautiful on me. Desperate, Emma sought help on online forums and support groups for victims of stalking. She discovered that other residents in the city had reported similar experiences, often involving the same pattern: obsessive surveillance, letters, photos, petty theft, and invasion of privacy. With the support of the groups, Emma increased her security, changed gyms, changed her schedule, and began seeing friends whenever possible. Determined not to be a victim again, Emma began recording everything: times, locations, photos of the stalker, letters she received. She shared the information with the police, who eventually opened a formal investigation. One night, the security camera caught Mr. Blue trying to force open the apartment door. The police were called immediately and managed to arrest him. The man, identified as Paul Richards, 39, had a history of stalking and invasion of privacy in other cities. Detailed diaries about Emma and other women were found in his apartment, as well as hundreds of photos, stolen personal items, and routine records. Richards confessed that he would choose his victims in public places, study their habits, and gradually approach them, increasing his psychological control until he dominated every aspect of their lives. The case gained repercussion in Vancouver and led to debates about protecting victims of stalking, safety in urban environments, and flaws in the legislation for stalking crimes. Emma moved to another neighborhood, spent months in therapy, and became an activist for the rights of stalking victims, participating in awareness campaigns and giving lectures at universities and companies. The story of the obsessive client has become a symbol of the everyday terror of being watched, chosen, and manipulated by someone seemingly harmless, showing that danger can lurk in the most common places in everyday life. For those who live in big cities, the warning is: do not underestimate signs of surveillance. Trust your own instincts and seek help at the slightest sign of danger. In times of exposure and fast-paced routines, the predator may be closer than you think, and the terror often begins with a simple coffee served to a familiar face. Hey guys, the stories of being chased home are still creepy, aren't they? If you're enjoying these suspenseful and tense stories, take a quick break, subscribe to the channel, and leave a like. This really helps the channel grow and motivates me to keep bringing you more spine-chilling content. Now let's get back to the next stories. There's still a lot of scary stuff ahead. The supermarket man Clara Meyer, 34, a single mother of a 7-year-old daughter, lived a careful routine in Zurich. She worked part-time, picked up her daughter from school, and always shopped at the same local supermarket. It was a normal Wednesday when she noticed a strange man among the shelves, watching her from afar. He wasn't carrying a basket, didn't seem to be looking for products, just followed her discreetly, looking away whenever Clara noticed his presence. At the checkout, Clara tried to ignore her discomfort, but she felt the man's gaze fixed on her back. As she walked out into the parking lot, she saw him standing next to a dark car, looking in her direction. She pretended to look for something in her bag, waiting for him to leave, but the man remained motionless, following her and her daughters. Every move. Clara quickly got into her car and drove to a nearby store to buy school supplies. When she got out, the man was there again, standing on the sidewalk, looking into the store. Clara's heart raced. She held her daughter's hand tightly and hurried to the bus stop, determined not to walk back to the car alone. At the bus stop, the man appeared on the other side of the street, pretending to talk on his cell phone, but clearly watching her. The bus arrived, and Clara boarded with her daughter, choosing a seat at the back to get a better look. The man did not get on, but stood on the sidewalk, following the vehicle with his eyes until it disappeared around the corner. The tense atmosphere did not dissipate when they arrived home. Clara locked the doors and windows, but when she looked through the curtain, she saw the same man standing on the corner, motionless, staring at the door of her house. That night, Clara barely slept. At every noise, she got up to check if the locks were secure. In the morning, she found fresh footprints in the garden, shoe marks she didn't recognize. She decided to take her daughter to school in a taxi and told the management about what had happened. On the way back, she noticed a dark car following at a distance, slowing down every time she stopped. Clara went to the police, but was only told to stay alert and record any approach. She tried to change her routine, different times, alternative routes, but the man kept appearing, always at a distance, always watching. Friends began to notice her nervousness. One of them, a retired police officer, suggested installing security cameras and recording all suspicious movements. One night, while reviewing the footage, Clara saw the man walking around the front of the house for more than 20 minutes, looking at the windows, writing something down on a pad. Her fear turned to paranoia. Clara began sleeping with her phone next to her, the lights on, and her daughter in the same bed. Determined to protect her family, Clara began researching similar stories in online groups. She discovered that other women in the area were reporting similar situations, unknown men following, watching, appearing at different points in the neighborhood. In some cases, there were attempted break-ins and unsolved disappearances. The police, under pressure from growing reports, stepped up patrols. One night, a patrol car caught the man loitering around Clara's house. When approached, he tried to flee but was detained. It turned out that he was a former security guard with a history of harassment and threats in other Swiss cantons. In the Yao, car maps of the neighborhood, photos of Clara and her daughter, notes about schedules and routines, and personal items belonging to other victims were found. The case gained prominence in the local press, leading to debates about urban security and protection for victims of stalking. Clara moved to a new neighborhood, increased security, and spent months in therapy, but she never felt completely safe again. Her story served as a warning to other women, showing that terror can begin with an insistent look in the supermarket and turn into a nightmare of surveillance and constant threat. The case of the supermarket man has become a symbol of the everyday fear of being targeted, showing that even in safe cities, danger can lurk in the most common places. For those who live the urban routine, the warning is, trust your instincts, seek help at the slightest sign of danger, and never underestimate the power of real fear, because often it is the only warning between routine and the abyss. The persistent delivery. Man Sophie MacLeod, 24, a recent literature graduate, lived alone in a small flat in the Leith neighbourhood of Edinburgh. Her routine was calm. She worked in a bookshop, had coffee with friends, and spent the evening reading. But that all changed one rainy Thursday when she found a box on her doorstep, a delivery she hadn't requested. The package had her name on it, but the address was incomplete. Inside was an old, clearly used cookbook with no receipt or return address. Sophie thought it was a common delivery mistake, but the feeling of strangeness remained. The next morning, the intercom rang early. It was the delivery man, a tall, thin man with a thin beard and an evasive look, saying that he had to collect the wrong package. Sophie cautiously left the box at the door. The man thanked her, but stood there for too long, asking about her routine. "Do you usually arrive at this time? Do you work near here? Do you live alone?" Sophie answered evasively and went upstairs uncomfortably. 2 days later, the same delivery man showed up again, this time with another box, claiming that there had been another mistake. Sophie refused, saying that she wasn't expecting any package. The man persisted, trying to convince her to accept the package and again asking personal questions. "Is anyone else home? Is your boyfriend around?" Sophie quickly closed the door, her discomfort growing. Over the next few days, minor annoyances began to accumulate. The intercom would ring at random times, always with the voice of the delivery man, who would claim to have forgotten a detail or to check if the delivery was correct. Sophie began to avoid going out alone at night, changing her routine and warning close friends about the strange behavior. One night, returning from dinner, she noticed the delivery man standing across the street, leaning against a lamppost, staring at the windows of her apartment. The chill down her spine was immediate. She ran upstairs, locked all the doors and turned off the lights, watching discreetly through the curtains. The man remained there for almost an hour, then disappeared into the fog. Tensions mounted. Sophie began recording everything: dates, times, questions asked, intercom recordings. She contacted the building's management, who confirmed that the delivery man had tried to enter several times, claiming that he needed to fix deliveries. Other residents reported strange approaches, but none as insistent as the one Sophie suffered. She installed a discreet camera in the living room window, pointing towards the street, and began sleeping with her cell phone next to her bed. One night, while reviewing the footage, she saw the delivery man walking around the front of the building for more than 20 minutes, staring at the windows, writing something on a pad. The next day, she found an anonymous note under the door. "I like seeing lights on late at night. You should go to bed earlier." Fear turned to paranoia. Sophie began to avoid even opening the curtains. Determined not to be another victim, Sophie took the evidence to the police. Initially, she was given general advice, but she persisted, showing them recordings and photos of the man loitering around the building. The police began a discreet investigation and discovered that the delivery man, identified as Craig Foster, had previously been reported for invasive behavior in other neighborhoods in Edinburgh. The investigation revealed that Craig used his job as a delivery man to map the routines of women who lived alone, creating a database of their schedules, habits, and vulnerabilities. He made fake deliveries and insisted on contact to test the victims' reactions, seeking out those who showed fear or isolation. In at least 2 cases, women had reported stalking and attempted break-ins after refusing contact. The atmosphere in Sophie's building grew tense. Other residents began reporting similar approaches, and one Friday night, a neighbor disappeared after reporting being followed by the same delivery man. The police stepped up their surveillance and, on a night patrol, caught Craig watching Sophie's building with a camera and a list of names and addresses. He was arrested and, in his home, they found photos, personal items of victims, and detailed records of routines. The story was covered by the Scottish press, prompting delivery companies to review protocols and require strict identification of employees. Sophie, devastated, moved to another neighborhood and spent months in therapy, but became an active voice in campaigns to raise awareness about stalking and urban safety. She gave interviews, participated in debates at universities, and helped set up a support group for victims of stalking. The case of the persistent delivery man has become a symbol of the real fear of being observed and targeted by someone who uses the city's routine to infiltrate, manipulate, and threaten. For those who live alone in big cities, the warning is: never underestimate unusual insistence, trust your own instincts, and seek help at the slightest sign of danger. The predator can hide under the most banal disguise, and the terror often begins with a simple wrong delivery. The bus passenger Miguel Alvarez, 22, an architecture student, always followed a meticulous routine in Madrid. He took the same bus, line 27, every day at 7:45 a.m., sat next to the window in the middle of the vehicle, and got off at the same stop, a few blocks from the university. It was a peaceful journey until he began to notice a discreet-looking man, always wearing a dark coat and a cap, getting on at the same stop, invariably sitting 2 rows back. At first, Miguel thought it was a coincidence, but the pattern repeated itself for weeks. The man never read, never used his cell phone, just stared straight ahead, sometimes following Miguel with his eyes in the reflection of the windows. When Miguel changed seats, the man changed seats too. When he got off, the man got off. One morning, Miguel decided to test it. He got off 1 stop earlier. The man did the same, keeping his distance, but clearly following him to the corner before disappearing among the pedestrians. The discomfort turned into paranoia. Miguel started changing the bus schedule, but the man always reappeared, as if he knew exactly when he would board. He tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched stayed with him all day. He told his friends, who suggested that it was just someone with the same routine, but Miguel felt instinctively that it was something more sinister. One rainy Friday, Miguel arrived home exhausted. When he put the key in the door, he realized it was ajar. His heart raced. He entered cautiously, calling out for his roommate, but he was alone. Nothing seemed out of place, nothing stolen. Still, small details bothered him. The bedroom window was unlocked, a chair had been moved, and his coat, which he had left in the living room, was now hanging in the bedroom. Miguel spent the night, awake, listening to every noise in the building. The next day, he found a folded piece of paper under the door. "You should lock the door better. Be careful who sits behind you." There was no signature, but the handwriting was precise, almost. Obsessive fear turned into constant vigilance. Miguel installed an extra lock and began to only go out when accompanied. On the bus, the man kept appearing, always behind, always alert. Miguel tried to photograph him discreetly, but the man seemed to notice and looked away. He notified the police, who registered the case, but without any explicit threat or crime, they could do little other than recommend caution. Tensions rose when Miguel realized he was being followed outside the bus, in the supermarket, at the university entrance, even in a coffee shop he never went to. One night, when he returned home, he found the bathroom window open and muddy footprints on the floor. Nothing was missing, but the feeling of being invaded was overwhelming. Determined not to be a victim, Miguel began recording everything: times, places, photos, stories. He shared the information with the police and his roommates. One afternoon, when he returned from college, he found the man standing across the street, staring directly into his window. Miguel took a photo and sent it to the police, who eventually began a more active investigation. Days later, police identified the man as Javier Ortega, 39, a former security guard with a history of harassment and threats. In his home, they found photos of Miguel, notes about his routine, and personal items that had been discreetly stolen from his apartment. Ortega confessed that he would choose victims on public transportation, study their habits, and test the limits of his intrusions without being noticed, feeding on fear and a sense of control. The case gained repercussion in Madrid, leading transport companies and universities to reinforce security and surveillance campaigns. Miguel moved to another neighborhood, spent months in therapy, and became an activist for the protection of stalking victims, warning of the real danger of being followed and observed by urban predators. The story of the bus passenger has become a symbol of the everyday fear of being targeted, showing that terror can begin with a simple glance on public transport and turn into a nightmare of surveillance, manipulation, and constant threat. For those who live in big cities, the warning is, never ignore the feeling of danger, seek help at the slightest sign of persecution, and trust your own instincts. Often, they are the only warning between routine and the abyss. The silent. Neighbor Marta van Dijk, 31, lived alone in an apartment on the third floor of an old building in the De Pijp neighborhood of Amsterdam. The view from her window looked directly onto the facade of the building opposite, a red brick building with large windows that always opened onto the street. Marta, accustomed to urban life, had never been bothered by the proximity of her neighbors until, as the months passed, she began to notice a disturbing pattern. Every time she came home from work or left for an appointment, the neighbor from the building opposite, a middle-aged man with a pale face and a neutral expression, would stand at the window, motionless, looking in her direction. At first, Marta tried to rationalize it. Maybe he just liked to watch the street life. Maybe he was retired and lonely. But the frequency with which she saw him there, always when she was coming in or going out, began to bother her. Sometimes he was there even late at night, when she was returning from events or dinners with friends. His unblinking gaze seemed to pass through the glass and follow her to the door of the building. Marta began to feel chills as she climbed the stairs, imagining her neighbor's eyes following her every step. She mentioned it to her co-workers, but only heard jokes about the secret admirer at the window. So she decided to change her habits. She started to vary her schedule, use alternative entrances, and avoid turning on lights when she arrived late. Even so, the man always seemed to know when she was arriving, appearing at the window like a silent shadow. One night, when she was returning from a party, Marta noticed a silhouette standing on the sidewalk. The man at the window, now wearing a dark overcoat, crossed the street and followed her a few meters away to the door of the building. Marta quickened her pace, quickly went inside and locked the door, her heart racing. Through the window, she saw her neighbor standing on the sidewalk, staring at the entrance of the building before disappearing into the darkness. Fear turned into paranoia. Marta began to avoid going out alone at night, locking all doors and windows and keeping her phone within reach. She decided to install a small security camera in the hallway of the building, pointing at the front door. For the first few days, nothing out of the ordinary, but when she reviewed the footage from one weekend, Marta saw her neighbor entering the building at 2 a.m, silently climbing the stairs and stopping in front of her apartment door. He stood there for almost 5 minutes, motionless, before going downstairs and leaving without being seen. Terrified, Marta took the images to the police, but since there were no signs of invasion or explicit threat, she was only told to stay vigilant and to record any approach. She decided to step up security. She changed the lock, installed an extra bolt, and asked the doorman to keep an eye out for suspicious movements. Even so, her feeling of vulnerability grew. Marta began to find small signs of invasion. A half-open window that she swore she had closed, a misplaced rug, an anonymous note under the door. "You look tired. You don't sleep much, do you?" The tone was cold and impersonal, but it made it clear that someone was closely watching her routine. Determined not to be another victim, Marta began recording everything: schedules, photos, stories, videos. She shared the information with neighbors and friends, who began to accompany her at later hours. One night, when she returned from dinner, She saw her neighbor again at the window, but this time he smiled and waved slowly, as if he knew she was filming him. Police, now armed with more evidence, stepped up surveillance in the area. On a night patrol, they caught the neighbor hanging around Marta's building, carrying a backpack containing photos of her, notes of her schedule, and a screwdriver. He was arrested and identified as Eric Janssen, 47, who had a history of stalking and threats in other Dutch cities. In his apartment, police found detailed files on Marta and other women in the neighborhood, as well as records of their routes, schedules, and habits. There were photos of Marta in different places, leaving the supermarket, getting on the subway, walking through the park, always taken from a distance, with dates and times written on the back. The case gained repercussion in Amsterdam, leading to debates about urban security, stalking, and victim protection. Marta moved to another neighborhood, spent months in therapy, and became an activist for the rights of stalking victims. Her story was featured in news reports and lectures, warning of the real danger of being watched and followed by urban predators. The trauma, however, did not go away easily. Marta developed insomnia, avoided open windows, and it took months for her to go out alone at night again. The support group she helped found grew, bringing together stalking victims from all over the Netherlands. Together, they pushed for stricter laws and protection programs, achieving important advances in the safety of women in large cities. The case of the silent neighbor has become a symbol of the everyday fear of being targeted, showing that terror can begin with a simple glance out the window and turn into a nightmare of surveillance, manipulation, and constant threat. For those who live in big cities, the warning is: trust your instincts, seek help at the slightest sign of danger, and never underestimate the power of real fear. Because often, it is the only warning between routine and the abyss. And so we come to the end of our 7 horror stories involving someone following you home. So which one scared you the most? Will any of them make you pay more attention to your surroundings when you return home at night? Tell us in the comments which one was your favorite. If you enjoyed this dive into the darker side of stalking and surveillance, don't forget to leave a like. This really helps the channel grow and encourages me to bring you more spine-chilling stories. And if you're not a subscriber yet, take advantage of it now to subscribe and activate the bell.